Thank you very much for coming. This is the beginning of a book that I'm currently working on with Paul D'Ambrosio, and book isn't published yet, but we're in the process of doing this, and hope to get some feedback from you. Maybe afterwards we can have a little discussion. I would just like to see your reaction. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for coming again. So, start with this passage. This is from a book by John Williams. It's written in the 1950s. It became a little bit fashionable in recent years, and this is just a sentence or two from this book, by this novel, Stoner, by John Williams. Sometimes in the morning when he shaved, he looked at his image in the glass and felt no identity with a face that stared back at him in surprise, the eyes clear in a grotesque mask. It was as if he wore, for an obscure reason, an outrageous disguise, as if he could, if he wished, strip away the bushy white eyebrows. So he's describing the scene, someone looking into the mirror and then feeling it very strange to see one's face, and then nevertheless having to somehow accept it. And this is what we believe is basically identity is. Identity is what enables us to accept the face we see in the mirror as ours. It is needed for coming to terms with the fact that this grotesque mask that we see there cannot be stripped away. We must identify with this face so that it doesn't appear to us as an outrageous disguise, or if so, then just for a moment. When we leave the bathroom, we need to trust that it expresses our thoughts and feelings quite naturally, and we need to prepare ourselves for the fact that everyone else will take this face to be precisely who we are. Now, I'm going to go on with the narrative. So the lecture is about the problem of identity and how we use different technologies, different modes to be capable of seeing this face in the mirror as our own, and to go out and spend the day and feeling that we have an identity. All right. There is a small, almost hidden beach in Macau called Chuk Wan, or Bamboo Bay. Despite its immediate proximity to one of the most densely populated and heavily touristic areas in the world, the casinos that draw tens of millions of visitors a year are a mere 5 miles away, Bamboo Bay is a quiet place. Some locals, most of them elderly, go there to swim in the muddy, plastic trash-filled ocean water every day. On the weekends, a few families, often Portuguese, spend some time there. The children play in the sand as their parents probably did in the old country when they were kids. The few tourists that do make their way to Bamboo Bay tend to be, like most tourists in Macau, mainland Chinese or other East Asians. But they do not come to swim or sunbath. They come to take pictures of themselves posing in front of the shallow waves coming in, sitting on a rock, or walking along the beach with long hair photogenically blowing in the breeze. These beachgoers don't stay long. They might stop to have a snack at the little cafe, but then they quickly move on to other attractions. A European friend, having observed such a scene, remarked with an element of both amusement and critical disapproval that these tourists were not properly enjoying the scenery and somehow oblivious to nature. To him, it seemed they were not even having a good time, just busy staging a visit that, precisely because it consisted mainly of staging digital photos, did not really take place, as Baudrillard might have said. Nowadays, this kind of criticism is common, and the friend felt well justified knowing that many share his view. But is the friend right? Perhaps he doesn't understand, being a middle-aged European, how tourism, with all of society, has changed. How the world is transforming from an older, bourgeois paradigm of authentic discovery to a new democratic one of profile-building exercise. The point of tourism today in a globalized world where all travel destinations are branded, marketed, and staged for visitors, cannot be to explore non-existing local, authentic localities. Tourism today means taking part in a public performance. It is like going to a show or a parade or even a protest. Post-colonial world tourism no longer primarily means white people traveling to native places. Increasingly, it means people from previously colonized or formerly second or third world countries like Russia or China participating along with Westerners in a global traveling spectacle. Displaying the simple fact that one can travel, that one has the time and money for it, and is granted a visa, is already sufficient enough reason for doing it. I travel in order to make it part of my profile, to actualize the prophilic potential of tourism. It's a demonstration to myself and to others that I too am a traveler. Like others, I too travel the world. The taste to pick a cool destination and the capacity to present the coolness of this destination to others further contribute to delineate and raise my profile. By projecting my travels to others, I curate my identity, no matter if I'm Asian or European or South American. Tourism today is a profile-building activity. Travel destinations, and almost every place in the world has become a travel destination by now, provide resources for a profile-based identity or prophilicity. Tourists make use of these resources. They generate identity surplus value out of the profile value supplied by the tourism industry. In tourism, concrete profile identity work consists in taking and posting photos. The taking and posting of images increases the profile value not only of the tourist, but of the destination as well. This can be experienced as enjoyable by all participants. Apparently, the middle-aged European friend did not yet understand the joy of tourism under conditions of prophilicity. Producing images of oneself, of one's face or body, of one's activities or possessions, in order to present them to others, is at the heart of prophilic identity work. Social media has allowed an unprecedented number of individuals to engage in this work at an unprecedented scale. The presence of social media in people's lives has expanded explosively. Millions spend several hours each day interactively participating in the merging roles of producer and audience. As a consequence, photo editing apps have become exceedingly popular. They are an important tool for manufacturing profiles and thus prophilicity. At the time of writing, the Chinese company Meitu, meaning beautiful picture, produces some of the most commonly used photoshopping apps in East Asia. According to Jiayang Fan in an article published in December 2017 by The New Yorker, Meitu's apps generate some 6 billion photos a month. Fan goes on to describe in detail China's selfie obsession, as her article is titled. Not only are people constantly taking photos and posting them of themselves and watching and commenting on other people's photos, they're also spending a lot of time staging and editing their photos. Fan, who is herself, as the British would say, of Chinese extraction, reports, I asked a number of Chinese friends how long it takes them to edit a photo before posting it on social media. The answer for most of them was about 40 minutes per face. A selfie taken with a friend takes well over an hour. The work requires several apps, each of which has particular strength. No one, I asked, would consider posting or sending a photo that hadn't been improved. The article goes on to accurately relate the preoccupation with taking and presenting selfies in East Asia to a flourishing cosmetic surgery industry and a widespread and intense celebrity culture. Cosmetic surgery appears as a sort of medicinal app that prepares the body for being photographed. It's a kind of biological photo editing prior to taking the actual photo. Celebrity worship, on the other hand, sets up a horizon of style. It provides everyone with a variety of profile models that provide orientation for self-shaping and self-presentation. As the term obsession in the title indicates, the New Yorker article obviously regards a preoccupation with the presentation of self-images as pathological. The Chinese, it seems, are crazy, and not only borderline out of their minds, but also morally wanting. Fan launches two ethical criticisms against them. Firstly, Fan depicts the intense interest in selfies as a form of narcissism, as a vain overindulgence with one's own image, and an unbecoming fascination with one's beauty. Secondly, she regards China's selfie obsession as an indication of a lack of individuality and authenticity. She illustrates her criticism by relating a story about Meitu, the company, party she attended. Hundreds of minor and major stars were chatting and snapping away on their cell phones. Meanwhile, Fan, with her critical eye, reflected on the situation. Her disapproval of the bonfire of vanities she witnessed there is symbolically expressed in recounting the following scene. An older woman, the wife of a janitor as it turned out, was ushered out by security guards, obviously regarded as an unfit intruder. Fan poetically describes her. I caught sight of an older woman, perhaps in her 70s, standing and watching the young dancers with an expression of rapt, unfiltered joy. Her face was creased and leathery, but her mouth, agape with wonder, gave her a childlike look. She was the only person there who wasn't holding a cell phone, and she was dressed plainly. The woman's exclusion from the party brings about an epiphany. As the guards succeeded in ejecting her, I realized that she was the most beautiful person at the party. Fan establishes a striking contrast between the purity of the elderly woman and all the other partygoers. She is unfiltered. Her emotions and expressions are of a childlike simplicity, and her clothes are plain. Moreover, she is not entangled in the net of modern technology, the only one not holding a cell phone, and thus without the machine of inauthenticity at hand. Therefore she is, for Fan, in sharp distinction to the fakeness of all the other party guests, the only genuine beauty. In her final verdict, Fan continues her plea for authenticity by accusing Meitu photo editing apps and their Chinese users of undermining individuality and individual diversity. Meitu and the trend it epitomizes seem to be moving China in the direction of homogeneity. A generation of Chinese, while clamorously asserting forms of individualism that would have been unthinkable for their parents and grandparents, is also enacting a ghastly convergence. Their selfies are becoming more and more similar, and so are their faces. Readers of The New Yorker are left with the conclusion that through the proliferation of social media and photo editing apps, the Chinese have become all but completely insane. They are indecently vain and inauthentic. By implication, then, we Americans or Westerners are warned, lest we be infected by the same selfie obsession insanity taking hold of China, which would destroy our morally grounded sense of true beauty that lies in unfiltered natural purity. Moreover, it will rob us of our individuality, and we will become, just like the Chinese, a homogeneous mass devoid of uniqueness and diversity. Fan's article is, from a philosophical perspective, highly problematic. What is not problematic is that it points out problems of social media use, such as the stress, anxiety, depression, and addiction resulting from hyper-concern with self-presentation, manifesting itself in extraordinary investments of both time and money into new technologies and the capitalist commodification of beauty. It is problematic to start that Fan suggests that the selfie obsession and the related phenomena of cosmetic surgery and celebrity worship are specifically mainland Chinese phenomena. The same phenomena are equally common in, for instance, South Korea, Japan, or Singapore. But they did not originate there. Long before photo editing apps, both cosmetic surgery and the celebrity industry were already quite prevalent in North America. Teeth whitening and facelifts, for instance, were practices almost expected of aging people in the USA, long before many in China even knew of such procedures. Capitalism, too, along with the commodification of beauty, predates both the current Chinese modernization era and the advent of social media. The core problem of Fan's article, shared by many current critiques of the social media, is, however, that it is unable to understand the selfie obsession in terms of profilicity. It wrongly depicts it as a primarily cultural Chinese issue, and not as a social and psychological phenomenon of identity construction that is globally applicable. As an immediate consequence of this cultural categorization, the article demonstrates an equally problematic authenticity bias and assumes that there are, for instance, truly authentic individuals and genuinely authentic beauty, both of which are now polluted by social media. Along with this assumption, highly questionable idealizations of authenticity are presented, and staunch good-bad dichotomies emerge, such as natural versus made-up. To be sure, obsessive selfie-taking and selfie-editing happens. And yes, selfie-taking and editing are hardly authentic. But does it make sense to decry selfie-taking as inauthentic if it has never been intended to be authentic in the first place? Why measure it against authenticity? It seems that the actual function of Fan's The New Yorker article is to defend the ideal of authenticity at a moment when it is most threatened. Fan's essay attempts to conceal the imminent breakdown of this false ideal. It seeks to save authenticity at a time when it's losing its foothold in society due to its own inconsistencies and anachronisms. The vehement defense of authenticity in the face of an increasingly omnipresent profilicity has the purpose of assuring ourselves that we can still be authentic at a time when in fact we too have already become wildly profilic. Jiayang Fan's idealizing depiction of the true beauty and natural authenticity of the elderly woman at the May-2 party is questionable, and it ought to be questioned. But the bigger question, one that opens up a view of the bigger picture, is this. Is Jiayang Fan and her professional environment at The New Yorker, where she published her article, really all that different from the people at the May-2 party and their jobs? Fan's condemnation of the Chinese selfie obsession and the resulting uniformity of self-images in China also comes with her Twitter handle and a picture. A profile picture of author Jiayang Fan herself. Oops, there you can see her. This picture is not photoshopped. It is a digitally altered portrait based on a photo or drawing. All essays in The New Yorker are accompanied by such images of their authors in the exact same standardized format. To use Jiayang Fan's terms, these pictures show a homogeneity and a ghastly convergence. The New Yorker's author images evoke cool forms of individualism with connotations purposely reminiscent of representations of creative, original, young intellectual people in animated clips or movies. The standardized alterations to her photo align Jiayang Fan's profile with the profiles of all the other contributors to The New Yorker, and thereby with the profile of The New Yorker as a capitalist media company. Here, the exact same prophilic mechanism, so disparagingly described by Fan at the May-2 party, is at work. May-2 too aligns the profiles of its representative with one another so that these profiles together support the profile of the May-2 corporation. This also works vice versa, of course. By being aligned with the New Yorker profile, Jia Yangfan's own profile and those of her co-workers are raised. Just as working for or with Meitu will be a prophylicity boost for those who do so. Moreover, when Jia Yangfan visited the Meitu party and marveled at the old lady without a cell phone, didn't Shi Fan have one in her own hand? She did, at least symbolically. Her entire presence at the event actually resembled a smartphone, picturing and heavily editing for more than 1 hour, we assume, it and its participants for her own media audience, readers of The New Yorker. In her report, Fan metaphorically photoshopped the appearance of the elderly lady precisely so that this unfiltered woman could represent the authentic life that Fan wanted to show to her readers and her editor. The image of the unedited elderly woman presented in Fan's essay is in fact just as edited as the probably hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures posted by the Meitu party guests on their own social media outlets. And how about Jia Yangfan's own social media profiles? Like most readers of this book, I hope there will be any. And of course its authors, she has several. The website everypedia.com lists 4: The New Yorker, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Clicking through the provided links, a good number of Fan's photos can be seen. Most of them are beautiful. It's difficult to tell if any of these photos and selfies are edited, or how much time may have been spent choosing the one that was just right. But none of them seems to correspond well to the ideal of unfiltered, authentic beauty that Fan's epiphany at the Meitu party revealed. Some show her at professional events, wearing makeup and her hair neatly arranged. Just as many other critics of the social media, selfies, and associated phenomena, Jia Yangfan simulates authenticity as a counterpart to their supposed inauthenticity. This edited authenticity is put into the service of furthering the prophylicity of the critics or the media companies they represent. In this way, the critics reproduce and proliferate the very same profile prophilic conditions that they critique. They operate under conditions of prophylicity, but paradoxically still display an ideal of authenticity, which they performatively contradict by this very display. In comparison with their critic, the obsessed Chinese selfiers are rather straightforward with regard to their fake images. Of course, almost everybody knows that almost everybody uses photo editing apps. It is, like using makeup, by no means a secretive act of hidden manipulation. It is plainly there for everyone to see. Everyone does it, and everyone knows it, and is expected to do it. As Fan mentioned, no one I asked would consider posting or sending a photo that hadn't been improved. In China, or to put it more accurately, in the global world of social media today, many users do not aim at presenting authenticity in the first place. A girl taking a selfie at Bamboo Bay does not pretend authenticity. And if authenticity appears, then it is often clearly staged, like someone posting on Facebook a photo of an authentic local dish. Here, authenticity is put in the service of prophylicity. Critics of social media, on the other hand, tend to disregard the non-authentic orientation of social media and inappropriately set up an authenticity standard to compare it to. Ironically, since these critiques are produced under conditions of prophylicity, they themselves do not and cannot meet authenticity standards. Thus, their authenticity can be deconstructed as staged and inauthentic, thereby the opposite of what was intended to be proven is shown, namely that the age of authenticity has lost its credibility. Interestingly enough, to return to cultural aspects of the selfie obsession and by extension of prophylicity, the qualms about the inauthenticity of social media seem to be a particularly Western problem. Europeans and North Americans who have been deeply embedded in the age of authenticity, and I'm not sure, and I'd be interested to hear from you about this, how far this is true also about South Americans, tend to cling to its problematic ideal and feel a nostalgia for it in a Facebook society. In East Asia, where role-based identity mode prevailed and authenticity has never played such a major role, people tend not to look for it as much, and thereby not to miss or misascribe it. I think I'm just going to read one more section, which introduces the basic vocabulary, theoretic vocabulary behind the first section that I read. In earlier times, identity was typically assigned by the social roles one was born into. Along with birth came not only one's gender, but also one's tribal or ethnic identity, one's social class, one's profession, and one's religion. Identification then typically consisted in committing to the roles people found themselves in by embracing the norms and internalizing the values attached to these roles. This is what we call, following Lionel Trilling, sincerity, a mental and social method of achieving identity based on sincere role enactment. The family was typically the core social unit within which sincere identity formation was experienced, developed, and confirmed. And here you see a Chinese family photo taken about 120 years from today earlier. And you see the women on the right side and the men on the left, and so forth. The image of a traditional Chinese family illustrates the power of role-based identity. It shows how, literally, roles assign places and positions. Females are supposed to be on the right, males are on the left. Dress indicates gender, age, and social status. Importantly, role designations indicate a bodily regime as well. They determine who gets to sit and who gets to stand, the length of one's hair, or throughout many centuries in China, the length of a woman's feet. You can see the woman who is sitting has still bound feet. It's not very clear if you're not familiar, but if you're familiar with the footwear, you will understand that these feet are bound feet. Oops. Without intellectual and emotional commitment, such often brutal physiological and behavioral or cultural regimes could have hardly been maintained in society or endured by individuals. For the practice of such regimes, it was most useful that people actually regarded these roles and these identities, as morally, religiously, or philosophically right. And the most powerful social and psychological tool to bring about such an affirmation was self-identification. If, for instance, a woman identifies fully with the social role ascribed to her by the Confucian society within which she grows up, she will be able to regard the crippling of her feet not only as morally right, but also as a part of her self-cultivation. External role enactment, even if it involves binding one's feet, can work smoothly once people find their identity in an internal commitment to it. When looking at the people depicted in the photo above, one can imagine that they could only cope with the immense role pressures of their family life by imposing a strict regime of sincere role practice on themselves and each other. Only in this way were they sure to never even consider the possibility that to a stranger their whole appearance might look like an outrageous disguise. In modernity, society became more dynamic. Social mobility increased, and people began to have a higher degree of choice regarding, for instance, their profession, their marriage, or their religion. This posed a challenge to traditional role allegiance. It was less evident that one needed to commit to the roles one was born into when alternatives could be realized. Increasing personal agency became not only possible but was desired. Therefore, identity became a problem. It was no longer almost ready-made at birth, but something to be discovered. Traditional role identities prescribed by society began to appear as external facades imposed on people whose real self was to be found somewhere underneath. The conception of the social role as a mask, covering up one's true identity, became a prime metaphor, along with the newly emerging quest for what now seemed to be the foundation of identity: authenticity. Again, following Lionel Trilling, we take authenticity to be a form of identity based on the idea that somewhere under all the roles there is me, that poor old ultimate actuality, who, when all the roles have been played, would like to murmur, off your landing, and settle down with his original actual self. The image of an authentic self as the true face of a person that comes to the fore once one's social masks are taken away is still popular. So this is a typical image displaying this idea of authenticity, that there is a true face under one's social appearance. In authenticity, one's face is expected to accurately express one's actual self. A mask that is no mask has to be found or created. That this may be an impossible task is indicated by the suspiciously frequent use of tautological phrases, such as truly authentic, in self-help manuals on authenticity. How can we trust authenticity? Did we present our real face to others, and did they show their true faces to us? Who can say for sure? What does an entirely original face look like? And if it looks like something, is it entirely original? What authentic hairstyle genuinely represents your true self? Such questions are difficult to answer. Moreover, not only self-help manuals but also more elaborated philosophical guides on how to become authentic eventually face a core paradox. Once one follows the advice to make one's own path, one is already following a path recommended by others. Authenticity, like sincerity, has its problems. But like sincerity, when widely applied as an identity-shaping method, it becomes convincing, credible, and powerful. It has been supported by a vocabulary, a rhetoric, an ethics, a politics, and an economy of individualism that made people believe that identity springs from personal originality, creativity, and autonomy. The protection of the assumed unalienable dignity of the authentic individual became almost a first commandment in post-Christian societies. Being tied to identity formation, authenticity was widely internalized. True identity value, it was assumed, could only come from being authentic. The modern woman would no longer need to identify as sincere wife, mother, and daughter. Instead, she could cope with the pressures of competing in a hyper-modern capitalist economy by discovering her calling, becoming independent, finding a partner uniquely suited to her, raising the most special children, and of course by staying true to herself throughout. Just as sincerity lost its grip on society and individuals, with a shift towards modernity, authenticity is now fading away, along with more recent changes. Authenticity relies heavily on personal interaction between people. Authentic individuals must confirm their identity value, and in order to do this, they must know one another and be at the same time in the same place. In the virtual world we inhabit today, such real-life interaction has become less and less important. Personal contact between seller and buyer is often obsolete or irrelevant when making economic exchanges. In times of mass media, as outlined by Walter Benjamin nearly a century ago, also artworks are typically not seen in person, by only a few, but as in film, projected to anonymous mass audiences. Copies have replaced originals. Contemporary democratic politics resemble popularity contests, where politicians, like entertainment celebrities, compete for the votes of huge public electorates. Today's society has switched almost entirely to second-order observation. This means, in line with sociologist Niklas Luhmann's usage of the term, we do not simply look at people or issues directly, but at how they are seen in public. In order to judge a restaurant, we look first at its reviews on Yelp, and later judge our experience in reference to what we read. We have developed the ability to judge products in terms of brands and people in terms of their profiles. We observe first how things are seen. Learning to see in this way, we also learn to show ourselves so. We form identity in the form of profiles. Profiles are images of ourselves presented for second-order observation. By looking at them, others can see how we like to be seen as being seen. Thus, we create and show pictures that look like this one. Don't know if you ever took pictures like this one. I'll post them. Could be on a beach, maybe in Brazil, I'm not sure. Here's no pretense of authenticity, no attempt to represent a mask that is no mask. It's clear to those who understand a picture like this that it is neither taken nor posted spontaneously. It is not meant to document an authentic moment in one's life to be stored in an autobiographical album or as part of a deeply reflective self-narrative. It is meant to communicate with anyone, which can strangely enough include all those in the photo. Such pictures are contributions to identity assembly. They are publicly presented for validation. If the photo is seen and liked, those who posted it get the go-ahead to continue displaying the personas they signaled to be ready to be. And I'm going to stop reading here. I have more things, but maybe I'll just stop. And we can see if there will be some discussion. Okay? So I would be interested in hearing if you can relate to this from a Brazilian, South American experience, if that is basically the same as the ones that I described.
Hello, Professor. I believe we all can relate. In my personal experience, the Brazilians are very much addicted to social media. We take photos just like that you showed. And I think our recent political issues are somehow related to that experience. Social media has taken the routine of most people. You see, it's a way for a society so divided as the Brazilian is, to relate. In social media, you can find people from different social classes, different places on the city, and people can communicate. But nevertheless, I find, well, it's very disturbing how does how the consequences of this new events are developing here in Brazil. I mean political change. I mean about how identities are being fashioned nowadays. I am very interested in how those political identities are being formed and fashioned. And I think the social media has a great role in these changes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I also think very much that I don't know how far you're interested in or know anything about social system theory. That's the context in which I was invited to give the talk. So the point of this project is to show that prophylicity as a concrete form of identity formation under conditions of second-order observation is now becoming increasingly powerful in all social systems. So obviously also within the political system. And I mean, from everything that I know about, I mean, Brazil's been very much on the news since the last elections and the world news, and it seems that the basic events are very similar, exactly in the way that you described, as to what is happening in Europe or what is happening in North America. And of course, in China, the political system is different. So, but there are also things happening that particularly in Hong Kong now, that happen in this way. And I think it is interesting to see, maybe to comment on this. First of all, I think that this is the same, the mechanisms are the same, no matter of what the political orientation is. I think that it's equally worrisome happening in Brazil as it is in Germany, even though the political persuasions are very different. But the mechanisms, I think, are very similar. But so somehow, I don't know, I think the left is suffering from two problems there. Number one, it doesn't understand that it is operating under the very same conditions and doing basically the very same thing than what the right is. And secondly, the left still, which is the same way of saying what I said before, still has this old idea. I don't know if maybe you're too young for this. When the new media came up, there was this enthusiasm on the left about the new media, that it would bring about a kind of Habermasian discourse forum in which all the different individuals would express themselves freely, and a common rationality of understanding would develop, and then we would eventually have the ideal kind of Herrschaftsfreier Diskurs, domination-free discourse, and then everything would develop into some form of utopian democratic society. And of course, it's exactly not what happened. And so in this way, I think Luhmann's theory, particularly in competition with perhaps a not so well-conceived critical theory, is really also a very good means to understand how the political reality in conjunction with the social media happens nowadays. I think the left has suffers from a thorough misunderstanding of the social media, how they operate and what can be. So we, again, maybe going back to the discussion that we had earlier, in order to be really critical of the media, I think the left needs more systems theory and less critical theory in order to be able to be more critical of the media. And then, of course, the point that I'm trying to make, or we, Paul and I, in this book, is there is also this false ideal of authenticity. Authenticity is just as impossible as prophylicity. Well, I mean, on the one hand, it is how we shape identity, and we must shape identity, right? On the other hand, no type of identity is more true than the other. So no form of identity is true. It's all a way of, as I said at the beginning, of being capable of looking into the mirror and saying, "This is my face." In order to do this, we must have certain technologies that allow us to do that. And in previous societies, this was a role identity, right? You looked into your face and you saw yourself as the mother and the father of the family, right? You saw this strange face, and then you would see yourself in there through the social role that you have. And eventually, when people of my generation looked into mirrors, they somehow eventually saw, which is kind of ridiculous, their true self in this contingent face that you have, right? And nowadays, when people look into the mirror, they somehow see the profile that they post on the social media, and then this allows them to identify with the face that they see in the mirror, or they don't need to look at the mirror because they look at their computers and see their face much more often on a computer screen than on an actual mirror, I suppose, today, right? This is where you see your face today. So prophylicity as such is neither better nor worse than authenticity. And authenticity is not something where we can find the true self as a prophylicity. And then maybe I'm just talking too much, also in connection with what we talked earlier in the personal discussions. The problem with authenticity is, and if you look at it in an economic, that a colleague of mine has written a lot about it, that authenticity is very much behind the semantics and the rhetorics of capitalism, of individualism, right? And so it was also something that was equally sold to people, right? It still is very popular in the commercials, right? You have to buy this brand in order to express yourself. You have to buy this product in order to be really original. And now, of course, this has changed, and now marketing operates with, and before that it was operating with sincerity, right? You have to buy this product in order to be a good housewife, right? This was like a generation of our parents. So that is the third, even though that wasn't your question, I think a third mistake that the left is still making, that which is a major trajectory of these initial paragraphs to the book, as if authenticity would be, the place to go, where we find non-alienation and non-exploitation, and that's also absurd, right? And rather than what you find today, almost exclusively in the critiques of prophylicity, which you seem to agree with, is the very problematic normative demand. In order to defeat prophylicity, we have to go back to authenticity. And I think that's, we first have to understand prophylicity, and once we understand it, then we can see what to do about it. And I'm not so sure what to do about it, if any. Spoke too long. Anyone else?
I have some comments, Professor. Thank you so much. I was wondering here that nowadays it's common to see and to listen to ideas that we are living in a fake news age or a fake news society. Does this argument about fake news doesn't confirm your diagnosis of prophylicity? This would be my first question, in the sense that fake news are usually narratives that usually are constructed and are oriented towards a second-order observation about ratings and rankings of people or organizations. And my second question is that also we talked a little bit earlier, is about the importance of organization in this structure you're describing. For instance, take the Airbnb case you mentioned in your paper.
Which I didn't read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably if didn't have Airbnb, would make sense about anything about the superhost idea. So what are the importance of these organizations that usually rank and organize, let's say the profilicity of society, you know?
Is Airbnb very common here in Brazil?
Yes.
Are you using it yourself? Yeah, I use it too. The next chapter would have been a short section about Airbnb. I'll summarize it briefly to just in 2 sentences. Another thing that did you hear about the social credit system in China? Yeah, did you know? The social credit system is some form of state government run surveillance thing, and then they collect your data, and then you get either bonus points for paying your bills and for not running across the street and then you get like access to better tickets on the train or stuff like this, and if you don't behave well, then you cannot buy a train ticket or something like this. And people in the West, they usually complain a lot about this, about the social credit system, but then the point is like we using things like Airbnb on a daily basis, where we already also use and incorporate ratings, right? We orient ourselves around ratings a lot, and we do not criticize this. When we when we rent a place through Airbnb, we also perform these rating operations by looking at the ratings, and in particular, people who are offering apartments on Airbnb, they apply these ratings to themselves. Like there's this notion of the superhost. Are you familiar with that? So this is really very important to people, and they identify with being a superhost, and they really want to keep their superhost status. So again, this is to show how on the one hand, we criticize the Chinese, but we've probably in the West, in the free West, internalized the ratings and rankings already to a much higher degree. So that's the background of the question.
Yeah, my question was about the importance of the organization itself.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that you're describing the issue of the identity construction,
yeah.
But I think also there is this idea of how their organization is.
Of course, and we have organizations like, let's say, Airbnb, and they operate very much with this profilicity. They count on this. They let everyone who's acting within it, for them, profilicity is a primarily identification and value thing, right? No matter if I'm offering my apartment or if I'm renting an apartment, I operate through the profilicity paradigm. And that happens in Airbnb, but that happens also in academia, and that brings us back to the initial thing. It also happens in politics. I mean, that's also important. If I vote for Bolsonaro, this becomes part of my profile. And within a certain community I'm in, it boosts my profile, right? And it's no longer like it was in the old days when it was still operating on sincerity. If I was a worker, I would vote for the Workers' Party. If I was an aristocrat, I would vote for the Aristocratic Party. Now it's basically, Ronaldinho is boosting his profile with Bolsonaro, right? And and mutually the other way around. Right, Bolsonaro boosts his profile with Ronaldinho, I suppose, right? And so it's really a kind of as Sean Parker, the vice founder of Facebook, has called it, is social validation feedback loops, and organizations make use of that. And right, they operate very much on the basis of establishing these social validation feedback loops. So, which is what I said, goes back to the first example that we gave also of the New Yorker, right? Or of the Meitu company. The New Yorker provides its profile of being cool to the people who read it and to the people who work for it, and vice versa. The readers and the people who work for it manifest and perpetuate and do prophylicity work for the New Yorker. So we have this kind of as Sean Parker called it, these kind of social validation feedback loop, and in this way, profile value is constantly produced.
And moreover, you also have the organization profile also.
Of course, the organization, exactly.
Relate.
Yes,
So
yeah.
This is also interesting.
Exactly, because in previous times we had roles, right? I was born into the role of the father or of the mother or the daughter, and my identity value and the value of the role were mutually. I was supporting the role of fatherhood by being a good father, but in return, the father role would provide me with my identity. Now it's the New Yorker and the reader and the person who works for the New Yorker. So instead of these, and they have to, and now we live in a much more dynamic society where things are much more threatened, right? We don't know what the next election is already coming up in 3-4 years. So this profile work has become much more intense. On the one hand, we have to be much more invested in the profile work. It's much more volatile. On the other hand, we also have more options, right? The father role didn't change for, once you were a father, you could live with that for the rest of your life, and the role would be stable. But that's not sure. We don't really know that a profile or like our superhost status can be. If we don't continuously work on our superhost status, we might lose it very easily.
The second question was relating with fake news. Do you think these also?
Yeah, I don't like the notion of fake news because I don't. Again, I don't know if you studied Luhmann or not. Luhmann wrote this whole book on the mass media, which is my favorite book by Niklas Luhmann.
It was translated in Portuguese.
It was, yeah. And I think Luhmann is very right in pointing out that truth is not really a core aspect of news. News is not about is not providing society with truth. Actually, that's what the academic system is supposed to do. Science, Wissenschaft, it's called in German, right? That's what what a scientist said is true. What the news do is they provide information. They tell you what's interesting, what matters. But that's different from what is true or not true. So the code of the news is information, non-information. And what does that mean? It means to present narratives that are supposed to be based on facts. But the factuality of the fact, so that something is simply a fact, doesn't make it newsworthy. Obviously, the fact that I'm presenting this talk here isn't newsworthy. There are only 5 people in the room. No one's interested in that. It's true, but it's not information. It's entirely irrelevant. Yeah, if you post it, you can't really get much prestige with that, right? Oh, I've attended this talk. There were only 5 people there, right? It doesn't. So. That isn't interesting information. So really the point about fake news is not so much that they are fake. The point is that they shape narratives with the intention that they are geared towards a certain audience, and that this certain audience sees them as information value, and that it catches on. So I think this I could talk more about it, but really if you want to get to understand something, how the social media work in favor of someone like Trump or Bolsonaro, the notion of fake news doesn't get you very far. It's not the problem with these news that they are fake. All news are fake to a certain extent because they're all selected and they're all just tell you a very minor part of the whole of reality. That's not that simply the fact that that some of these news that these people get get elected, that they are fake, is just a minor component. That's not what's really interesting about them, or that's not really what's shocking about them.
Yeah, but I was thinking about the relation with this narrative construction and the profile issue you mentioned in the paper. Do you think that this could be related, since more and more we are talking about fake news,
Yeah.
and there's this process of building identity based on profiles.
Of course,
And,
yes.
I was wondering about this relation.
Yeah, because I mean, in the social media, and it's even not about news, right? It's about pushing a certain profile. It's just like a celebrity. Like, how do we, you have must have a lot of celebrities too, right?
Soccer.
Whatever, yeah, but also like pop stars and stuff like this. And again, the point is not really that very important truth about them. It's about that you in the media that you present stories and stuff around them that make them somehow interesting. And so it's about building a narrative. It's about shaping a personality, right? That's what it's about. And then if you want to succeed politically nowadays, then you have to shape a personality. And sometimes, saying outrageous things is a great garners a lot of attention. And I mean, both Bolsonaro and Trump practiced that very well. And everyone knows that it's fake. Everyone, just like the photoshopped. You cannot. I mean, how could as if Obama was not somehow. I mean, Naomi Klein in her book No Logo already called Obama the super brand. It's impossible, right? That's not the point. It would be impossible to be a politician if you would say only the truth. No one would listen. You can do the same thing that I do here, and you have 4 people in the room.
Just a comment about trying to relate this political question to law. In Brazil, our Supreme Court, as the judgments are transmitted to the television.
Yeah.
So the judges and the media in the last decade is increasingly keeping attention to these judges and trying to build the profiles of each judge. And the case law of our constitutional courts is somewhat related to the judge that will give a monocratic decision, will decide that case or the other case, and they perform in face of the cameras.
So the judges also become celebrities.
They are also become celebrities in Brazil.
I mean, in politics, that's very interesting. And I think that's then maybe Brazil is already a step further in the profilicity of the legal system than other societies. I think that's very possible. Because I also read this in the news, so it's in the news, it's out there, right, that about these judges. I mean, also, again, going back to the fake news, to say to a politician, oh, it's fake news, is about as effective in a sense to say to a bishop, oh, what you tell us about Jesus is fake news, right? That doesn't matter, right? Just as religion is not about communicating facts, politics is not about giving people a vision, giving people a dream, giving people something to identify with. That's how it works, right? That's like, it's as absurd to critique politicians of doing fake news as it would be to, and in Brazil you see the same, as it would be to accuse a priest or a preacher of spreading fake news. Yeah.
And the agencies can get an error, and you need a third order level to correct the fact-checking.
But the fact-checkers don't really bother the politicians. Yeah. Because also the fact-checkers, of course, serve a certain political agenda usually. They're not the fact checkers, at least in Germany from what I know, the fact checkers are horribly ideological. They're even worse than the fake news in sometimes. Yeah. And you can see it. Again, it's obvious, just like with a Facebook photo. It's obvious that they do the fact checkers in order for political gain. Right? It's like, you know, as if you would pretend that your photo that you post on Facebook is your true self. That's the same kind of pretentious thing. Everyone knows that that the photo is selected and that the photo is, at least in China, that it's photoshopped. How common is this photoshopping here? Mm. But you selected, obviously. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So in China, it's really like super, as she says in the article, right? Everyone does it, and everyone knows that everyone else does it. It's like, you know, maybe I don't know, it is in Brazil. I think most, at least women that I saw when they go out, they use makeup, right? So, and it's not considered to be fake. Yeah. And like in the same way, in China, it is common. It is at least as common as it is to put on makeup, it is to Photoshop the pictures that you post on Facebook. How is that here? What would you say? Mm. Yeah. 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 Right. And again, then to say, oh, that's a fake self that you're presenting, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Right? Which, yeah.
There is a picture of him being at the river Jordan, getting the sacrament.
Oh my God. Oh.
And so this profile, this identification with the Christian community.
Mm. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
photos that we put in the books are
Yeah.
very representative.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again, Professor Moeller, for being with us here. And again, I invite everyone for our final week that will be next week, November 12th, with Professor Macona, Professor Cicero, and Professor Mateo, both you and our session. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we need to get a picture.
Okay. Yes. Sure.
So we can put it on the Facebook.
Of course. Of course. Yeah,
Not
there's
with the
nothing
Photoshop,
wrong with
not
it.
with
There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Can you email a photo? to me?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, please Photoshop my. I don't know how to take off my beard. Bezio also works with this professor. He's from social system theory as well.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thank you for coming.